This week on Silicon Reel, we have the head of Google's Campus London, Sarah Drinkwater.
And I think the scene right now is so fantastic. There's so much going on. You know, if you're fintech, you go to level 39. If you're really creative, you go to second home. I suspect a lot of those would have happened without campus, but I think what we've done really well is the perception that the Valley is kind of very male-dominated, very white-dominated. You look at campus with 90 nationalities, 29% female, very age-diverse, I think. I think London, you know, being so multicultural has that to offer, you know.
Silicon Reel presents Sarah Drinkwater, Google Campus London.
For me, the biggest thing we should be careful with is comparing ourselves too much to the Valley.
This is Silicon Reel, the weekly talk show dedicated to the people of the London technology startup scene. My guest today is Sarah Drinkwater, who heads up Campus, which is Google's physical space for early-stage entrepreneurs, offering founders a support network, mentoring, workspace, and even more. Previously, you ran the global team of community managers around Google Maps. I was at Campus exactly a year ago and got a tour from Easy Vidra, who was formerly head of that, and now I've been back there today. It's like full circle. You just gave me a great tour. Sarah, thanks for that tour, and welcome to Silicon Reel.
What a fantastic introduction, Brian.
I'm known for those. I'm thinking about just outsourcing intros.
I mean, I think.
Calling it a business model. You have a big date coming up next week. I was wondering if you could tell me about that date and what it means to you and how long you've been involved in this crazy creation that most people don't understand that well called Campus.
So I guess I'll start with what Campus is and what it's all about. We started Campus 3 years ago as a connecting space for startups. So I joined Google from startups, and in every case, I was the only woman, I was the only non-developer. Events were always in pubs. It was really hard to get education. And when I met investors for the first time, it was often when I was asking them for money. I didn't know what I was doing, frankly. I mean, a lot of that's to do with me rather than the scene. But I think the idea of Campus was that people matter. Asking for advice really helps. Groups can always do what individuals can't. And with Campus, what we're trying to do is really put together a space where you can go and ask those questions, get education, run an event, move in full-time for our partners Tech Hub if you want. And I think we've been really successful. It's our third birthday next Thursday. Really exciting. You know, we've now hit 40,000 registered members. We're about to launch our third campus in Seoul. We've got 3 more coming up this year in Warsaw, Madrid, and Sao Paulo. And I think it's a really good moment to kind of look back, celebrate what we've done in London, and have a great party with our community of startups, investors, founders, and more.
What do you think the scene would look like here if there wasn't a campus? You know, if you weren't there or there wasn't this base? Because I know a lot of people really start off by just coming by campus and registering and using the broadband and trying to get all these ideas. But how do you think it's affected the ecosystem? I mean, if you can be honest, and you don't have to be humble.
You know, I think we launched at exactly the perfect time. We were so lucky. The government was talking about Tech City. There was loads going on in this area. This area for me is so perfect because you're kind of right in the middle between all the money in the city and all the creative agencies of Soho, something else London is really known for that I think the tech scene sometimes forgets about. 2012 was massive. It was a big year for London. For me, having spent the previous 2 years in startups, having come from journalism, it really was. We were all dotted around London. No one was talking to each other. There was really kind of a lack of education, a lack of knowledge. And I think the scene right now is so fantastic. There's so much going on. You know, if you're fintech, you go to level 39. If you're really creative, you go to second home. I suspect a lot of those would have happened without campus, but I think what we've done really well is we've made that home for when you really are first starting out. You looked in our cafe earlier today. A lot of those guys are still working part-time at their day jobs. And I see my job as making them quit that job and go full-time.
Right. When I first started covering the scene, when we started, Silicon Reel about 2 years ago, it was kind of the place where if you didn't know that you wanted to get into tech, you would just go to the campus. You know, it was like a welcome to all. You come in, it's got a really great vibe to it, fun vibe, lots of room, lots of mentoring options and things like that. And it was kind of like, yeah, when people didn't know where to go, they went there. And this is, let's go back. This is before there was a lot of incubating options, a lot of, accelerator options. There wasn't a lot out there.
So I think first of all, that's really flattering, and I love it when people say that. I meet people in the cafe the whole time that have moved to London the previous day and they've come to campus to, find a flatmate, get the education. I think what's really exciting about the scene now is you've got the early stage offering at campus. You know, you can come there, you can go to any of our events. We did 850 last year, 2.5 a day.
That's hard to even register.
I know,
in my
it's crazy.
brain.
Well, so my team run probably about 5% of those. So most of them are run by the community themselves.
Okay.
And we're talking hackathons, conferences, demo days, workshops, all sorts. I think what's most exciting about the space is anybody can hire it. And the only criteria is the event has to be free and aimed at startups. So tomorrow we have an event around Be a Founder. And that's aimed at people with full-time jobs who want to kind of really quit. It's about inspiration and education. We've also got a day tomorrow around e-commerce and making the most of your kind of WordPress plugin. We had a Colombian accelerator there yesterday showcasing their startups. I think what's exciting about that for me is the variety. You know, it's bringing people through the door the entire time, whether they're based in London, whether they're based in the UK, no matter what stage they're at. And I think what Campus does best is that convening piece. I think what's exciting about the other spaces that are open now is it means entrepreneurs and founders around the UK and around the world have more choice than ever. And for me, that's a fantastic thing. It's all about the support that you need to get where you want to be, whether that's funding, mentorship, finding a co-founder, all of those things.
You know, I was just reading this book called In the Plex, which is a great history of Google.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when you really look into the history of organizations, you learn so much about that organization and why they do what they do. And it's a great book and a great read. And I think it's a fairly objective one as well, as, you know, kind of taken from an outside journalist that recorded it. And you see why kind of Google is Google and how they started and, you know, how Sergey and Larry did the original pieces. And so I was wondering with Campus, do you remember why it was done? And you chose that word campus, which is an important choice that you made. You also didn't brand it with Google. It was Campus London. And I was just wondering what was some of the thinking behind that. You talk about this space that anyone can use, but like you could have easily made the wrong choice.
I think we were super sensitive to that. And I mean, obviously Easy was in charge of Campus in those days. I joined later. But in terms of, from our point of view, you know, Google began in a garage. Our founders are still, you know, running the company. They're still pretty young, they're under 45, which to me makes me feel like I've not done enough with my life. And I think,
won't ask how old you are.
Well, not 45 just yet, but, you know, heading
I'm
towards
almost
there.
45.
Well, in that case, we should be, you know, I can be Larry, you can be Sergey.
Okay.
But I think with Campus, what we're really trying to do is avoid that idea of a big company comes into a scene they don't know yet and says they have all the answers. We're still learning every day. And I think what I find so fascinating is when corporates approach me and say, how can I work with startups? Sometimes they're still assuming that they have nothing to learn. And for me, there's so much there that a big company can learn from small companies. With Campus, we always made it all about the community. That was very important to us. You know, before we launched, we talked to the community, and I'm talking, you know, VCs, small companies, big companies, service providers, government, everybody. And we said, what do you need? And we used that as really a guide for how we set the building up. So the fact that we have event space, 2 event spaces, that came really from the community. I don't know whether we'd identified that beforehand. And when we launched Campus itself, we moved the startups in first. Then we had our PR and policy launch. And I think for us, we've always tried to be really thoughtful about how we've launched and run Campus. We very much chose to call it Campus London. We wanted a name that was exciting, fresh, energetic, gave the sense of community, gave the sense of meeting new people. And I think we can all remember that first week at college, or university as we call it over here, when you know, you're reinventing yourself. You've got no clue what you're doing. You've come from your parents' house. You're refreshing yourself. It's a new opportunity to learn, to grow, to meet people. We were trying to really capture that sense. And what's really interesting for me is we've never called it Google Campus. Loads of people do. And I'm completely fine with that. I think we always chose to call it Campus London for that reason.
Right. Yeah, I've been corrected a few times. Maybe when Easy was here, I was corrected.
Sorry.
You know, you mentioned the word campus, and it's funny. I'm thinking right now when I first went to university, and you get there, and it's all about the learning, and so it's this weird thing where everyone's just trying to learn. But how do you balance that with the fact that these companies need to turn into ultimately, you know, revenue generating entities? I know Seed Camp is located on a few floors there, and you constantly have, you know, days like you said tomorrow, or how to be a founder for people like that. How do you balance that learning versus building a company?
The way that I see it is 80% of our content, and by content I mean the events we run, the ethos we have, is all about starting. We know that's really hard. 20% is all about scaling. And I think scaling is really such a big phase, such a big kind of theme of this year with, you know, Sherry's report, a lot of the government focus on that. Scaling for me really is when you've got more than a team of 2 or 3, you know, you've moved past the founders alone. You're building your team, you're creating a culture, you've got some traction, you're probably post-accelerator, you're at that stage. We do run programs for that stage, but they tend to be less frequent. You know, that is 20% of our offering. We have things like Campus Exchange next week, and that's bringing 6 e-commerce startups from around the world to London. So we've got a company from Korea, a company from Spain, and these are fantastic companies that are really well known locally with decent traction heading towards Series A. And for us, it's a week of intensive mentoring, intensive connections, meeting investors, design sprints. I think at that stage, there is so much great support in London. And again, I'm thinking about the vertically based accelerators, the Techstars, the C Camps. I think our core will always be the starting up piece, but we're increasingly thinking about how we can support scale ups.
Right, because when you mentioned that to me today about these Series A pitches and stuff, I was like, whoa, I always thought of campus as this, pre-angel type of a piece as opposed to like the Series A thing. Is that something that you've matured into, or did I just misconstrue?
Well, I think part of that is our community is growing up. I mean, our membership grew 70% last year, and as we grow up, I guess we're now in our third year, heading towards the third year. Every year the community gets more diverse. Every year they raise more money. So our funding survey recently closed, and startups on our network last year created 1,200 jobs. They raised over 40 million in funding.
40 million pounds.
40 million pounds.
That's a lot of money.
But interestingly, only 13% of that came from VCs. Every year we're seeing a rise in crowdfunding. We're seeing a rise in angels. For me, that's a really positive message in terms of the UK funding landscape. But it also shows that our companies that's double the amount of funding last year, double the amount of jobs last year. There's a potential for a couple of companies that began. So TransferWise, who moved into C Camp in our first, they won C Camp Week in 2011 and moved into the building when campus first opened with C Camp in 2012.
Okay.
I mean, valued at $1 billion.
Yeah, I didn't realize there was that recently.
Well, even Code Club, they began at campus as well 2 years ago. I think we have got a couple of those really great success stories. I think what concerns me occasionally is that I'm still being asked questions about where a campus's exits, and I guess for me, that's kind of comparing it directly with Silicon Valley. I think the London scene, we know it's distinctively different. I think increasingly we're seeing late stage funding replace the exits that might be typical in the Valley. We're seeing a lot of these companies really build sustainable businesses for the future.
Okay. You worked at Google for a long time. 12 years, 10 years?
Actually, no, 3 years.
3 years, okay, before.
Feels like 10 years, but
Okay.
I think that's a good thing.
And ultimately, we can call it campus, but Google owns campus and is in charge of funding it, et cetera. What do you tell people when they say, okay, Google owns this? Does that mean they are looking for companies? And then how do you manage it internally? Because you used to work there and now you don't work there. How do you manage that relationship? Because it could get blurry at some point.
No, and I get asked that a lot, and I'm always happy to clarify. So I guess from my point of view, we're not a building for Googlers. We're not a building to hire people. We're not a building to fund people. We genuinely are doing this to help startups. I report into Google for Entrepreneurs in the US, my amazing manager, Mary Grove. And I think a few of my team are tuning in, so hi guys. They love watching me kind of stumble over my words on this kind of thing.
Well, they won't have that chance today.
Well, I hope not. I think in terms of the relationship with Google, so I have both sides of the coin as experience. So when Google first launched Campus a couple of years ago, I began volunteering. We have this really fascinating thing at Google, which I wish more companies would take up, 20% time. And it means you spend 4 days a week doing your day job, 1 day a week doing a passion project. For me, having come from startups, it was always campus. I was always really excited by the idea. And I was part of a cohort that run various programs here, Campus for Mums, a baby-friendly startup school that I began the UK version of, Women at Campus. And when I joined the team over here, we work very cross-functionally. We couldn't get what we get done there's only 3 of us at campus full-time. Without those, it's crazy. Without those volunteers, we wouldn't get anything done. And I think particularly things like our Friday mentoring, every Friday morning, 10 to 12:30, we do mentoring around, sometimes it's Google products like AdWords or analytics, but more often it's things like marketing, branding, how to pitch to investors. We did 1,100 hours last year. We had 10% of all London Googlers came and mentored. That entire program is run by a volunteer. And every week, that team of volunteers hassle Googlers to come and get involved over at campus. They hassle startups to sign up. So much of what we get done is done by those volunteers. And I think I'm so deeply grateful to them giving us their time. I also work a lot with marketing, PR, policy, developer relations, who run their amazing program, Launchpad at campus. I think for the most part, Googlers get very excited about what we're doing at campus. They get very excited about startups. So many of us come from that world anyhow. It's something we really are passionate about.
Right. Is this something, I guess it is something you're scaling at this point. I know you're launching in Seoul, Sao Paulo, Warsaw, Madrid. Is there a campus in the U.S.? And you probably get asked that a lot. And what is the plan for campus? And can you replicate it in other cities, or is it really specific to the personality of that city?
I think it's so specific. So the reason that we picked those 4 cities, and Campus London has been going for 3 years. We have Campus Tel Aviv, that's been going for 2 years, which is a bit smaller. We've always been very thoughtful about how we scale campuses. It's such a distinctive thing. It's such an intensive offering in terms of time and money. And also, particularly with North America, I don't think there's a need in the same way. So the team that I work for, Google for Entrepreneurs, we support startups through two ways. The first way being the kind of owned and operated campuses. The second way being we kind of support best-in-class partners around the world. And those are people like Camp Tech Hub in London, but also amazing projects like Gaza Sky Geeks, Gaza Zoning Accelerator. We've got something like 24 tech hubs across North America. So, Galvanize in San Francisco, Capital Factory in Austin. For me, when I look at Galvanize in San Francisco, and they have the most amazing building in downtown on Howard Street, they've got their G School base there for coding. I don't think there's a need for campus in the same way there. I think the culture over in many of the US sort of very brilliant tech cities, it's always been collaborative. It's always been about learning. You look at London, I think one thing campus has done really well, and I will take a tiny bit of credit for this, is we've put people together who might not have met otherwise. We've got them talking to each other. You know what Brits are like sometimes, Brian. We're not always as friendly as we could be. We're not always as collaborative as we could be. I think we've really worked to kind of sort of challenge that perception, I guess. And I look at all of our new locations. There are very, very particular reasons why we've picked them. You look at Warsaw. They've got the most amazing technical talent. But potentially what we're hearing from the community is there's no connecting space. There's very few co-working spaces there. There's a real dearth of kind of business knowledge, perhaps. You look at Madrid, and there's massive youth unemployment, but a huge amount of talent, fantastic universities across business and technical talent. And a lot of the money goes a long way there. I met a guy who built a hack space with €1,000. They're really looking for that connecting space to get together. All the events they're having now are massively oversubscribed, held in pubs, held in parks. I think what we're trying to do with those kind of European campuses is, we don't know if it will have the same impact as here, but we're really trying to kind of promote that kind of culture, get people excited about being entrepreneurial, whether that means founding companies, whether it means working for startups, whether it means just educating yourself within a larger company. All of those for us are successes, I would say.
Okay, let's talk about three letters that Easy brought up last time, and those are OKR.
Da, da, da.
And if Sarah probably knows what those are, if she's been in Google for a while. This is something that has been run at Google for a while. It's actually brought up in the book In the Plex, and this is the objective and key reports that I believe everyone at Google is responsible for quarterly, perhaps.
So we have company-wide OKRs,
okay, right,
team-wide OKRs, and personal OKRs.
And these are all public, as in you can go see Larry and Sergey's
But that's
OKRs.
what I love. I think something that strikes me, I've been at Google for 3 years now, 3.5, almost 4 years. The transparency internally is massive. I think that's something culturally that I really respect, admire, and love, and it really works for me. So OKRs, it just means you know where you're going. And I think we're very empowered internally to ask questions, take coffee with anybody, really kind of go searching, meet teams, work out collaborations ourselves, rather than have some invisible leadership figure come down and say, oh, this is what you're doing. And I think particularly with campus, we're very data-driven as a company. That's how we kind of assess our success. There are certain metrics that I really care about with campus. We're shifting them all the time, and I'm sure Easy talked about this with you. So for example, with the funding survey, for me, that's a really good sign of our community health.
Right, and the fact that the percentage of VCs and non-VCs is a big one as well. What are your OKRs? What's the OKR of campus? I mean, you don't have to be specific, but or for example, in Warsaw, what will that OKR be for a year? I mean, I always think like, how does Google try to justify starting here?
Yeah, I think so. There are certain things we take into account with new locations, and in all of those 4 locations, there are 3 key figures that we came up with. The first one being density of startups. So when we looked at London 3.5 years ago, the number of companies starting in this particular postcode, every year in EC1, EC2 was increasing. Density of startups, but a lot of them weren't doing that well. So we saw that there were startups starting but not succeeding. Second of all, the number of established companies. So you look at you think about the US, we were talking about this earlier, and you've got SF for tech, LA for film, you've got New York for media, finance. You look at London and really it's got it all. It's got all of those companies in a geographical space that's comparatively small. Particularly this part of town, you walk around quite small, crabby streets, you will meet someone you know at some point, which I think is great. Compared to the Valley, where you are driving like 5 miles to go and get coffee, you're having to drive to meet people. Here, it's so much easier. And I think thirdly, we had an office here where we had Googlers, that's what we call ourselves, it's embarrassing. We had Googlers across sales, marketing, engineering, leadership, all these kind of functions. And to get the value for the startups, we really wanted to be able to take that knowledge and bring them to campus and get them helping out. So with our new locations, really with Madrid, strong history of entrepreneurship, lots of established industries, particularly around kind of e-commerce and retail. And we had a team there locally that was very supportive and very excited.
Okay, that's a good enough reason. Tell me about something practical. We got a lot of people that are listening that are, on the edge of starting something up. Maybe they're like me, they were a former banker or a consultant and they haven't pulled the trigger. Maybe they're going to be at your class on Saturday. What do you see as some of the biggest mistakes that startups make or something that they should just watch themselves? And I'm guessing this has changed in the last year or two, maybe as people become more educated, but just to give people a little bit of knowledge, what are just some things you see right off the bat where you're like, don't do this or make sure you do this or that?
I was thinking about this recently. I think the things I get asked the most, alongside the obvious money, how do I hire a developer? The number one thing I get asked is about hiring. How do I find a co-founder? How do I find a technical co-founder? What kind of contract should I have? And particularly being based at campus full time, I've seen a couple of nasty co-founder breakups. Heartbreaking. I've seen my dad go through a nasty co-founder breakup. That was really heartbreaking.
Your dad?
My dad.
Right. I want to talk about that later. He was a coder, right?
He is,
right.
yeah.
Okay.
He works in InfoSec now. I think getting the people right is so critical, and particularly something I see a lot of, and I think because this is because London doesn't have as much. We have a lot of technical talent, but it's nowhere near as strong as somewhere like Warsaw. I see a lot of founders who are not technical, who have an idea, who've left their jobs full-time to work on the idea, and they're still searching for a CTO. To me, you can't validate your idea and know if it's worth pursuing full-time until you've built it. And I think you can't build it until you've got someone who can build it for you. So I think really take your time, build out your idea, get the feedback. Validating your idea isn't just building it, it's finding the right audience base. And I think particularly we're seeing a lot of companies who, I saw one recently where it's two very young guys building a company that's aimed at women in their 50s and 60s, which is great, but they have nobody on their team of that age group. They've got no advisors in that age group. And the one thing I said to them is go and meet more of your customer base, talk to them, find out what they care about, because if that's not what you care about every day, all the time, you don't really know how to solve it yet. So for me, the best founders, the ones that I really get excited about are super energetic and passionate, even when the going is tough. They really care about culture and people because it's all about the people. And they've really taken the time to get to understand the pain points they're trying to solve. So for me,
before they go technical, they should really hone their business model first, or the feedback loop?
I think if you're not a technical founder, you need to find someone, you need to get someone to believe in you really early on. I think it's very hard to outsource your idea when you've already quit your job, when you've already decided you're going to work on this full time. I think really it's an exciting time right now. There is so much support out there. There are so many events where you can meet co-founders. Like General Assembly have run an amazing developer showcase at campus. And it really is, you go in the room and there are 30 nervous junior developers waiting there with their portfolios who always get hired. There are easy ways to meet developers, but I'm still hearing the whole time, I can't find a co-founder. And I always challenge that and say, do you want a co-founder or do you want a developer? What are you really looking for
Okay,
here?
so that's a mind shift that should happen. Because there's all the business types, right? They're all the MBA guys at the startup things and none of the tech guys. And you're saying that they should be thinking more about a partner as opposed to just hire a developer. Is that the wrong way of looking at things,
I think
too?
it's more about working out what you want. I mean, I personally always prefer partnerships just because that's how I'm wired. I like collaborating. I think the happiest teams I see are teams where everyone really believes in it, everyone's really bought into it. There's definite things each individual can contribute. If you're a solo founder who's not technical, trying to communicate with a developer who doesn't live potentially in the UK, there are challenges there. So I think it's about being thoughtful, getting customer feedback, building thoughtfully. I mean, really, thoughtfulness always, compassion and thoughtfulness.
Right. Okay. So the big things, I know you're doing a class or something about finding developers, right?
Yeah,
and,
always.
And then raising money and hiring. You're saying those are the pain points.
Well, the pain points in terms of London, I think there are pain points. These are universal pain points. And also right now with accelerators, it's which accelerator do I go into?
Right.
There are so many options in London and around Europe.
And for a lot of people at campus, is that their next step into an accelerator?
Often it's full-time co-working space. So, you look at Tech Hub in campus, it only has 150 desks. It's comparatively small. They've got two other tech hubs in London. They've got one at Old Street, one in Spitalfields with 500 desks each. So what we see a lot of is, say, take Flat Club, for example. Nitzan, who's an amazing founder, began at campus with one desk and now has a team of sort of 25 or so based at Tech Hub in Old Street. And what's nice is he really kind of comes back, shares his learnings, goes to events at campus still, and is able to kind of mentor, people who are kind of 6 months behind him. But I think at the same time, many of us startups go to co-working spaces that perhaps are more suited towards their vertical. Whether that's the trampery, the bakery, there are so many co-working spaces now.
Yeah.
That's exciting because that wasn't there 5 years ago or even 3 years ago, I think.
Right. And I mean, and it's interesting. I just wondered what your take was on these co-working spaces, because we've had James from Central Working in here. I had the Trampery. I was at Second Home last night for the first time. And
Gorgeous,
I
huh?
walked around there. I was like, wow, cheers to Rohan for setting that up. I almost walked into some of the plexiglass. There were so many plants in there. I was like, what's going on? It's quite a unique space.
Yeah.
But how do you choose on where you go next? How do you choose an incubator? How do you choose a co-working space? It's so tricky.
I think it's people, culture, community. And I want to add that I'm a really big fan of Second Home. It is the most beautiful building, so stunning. But it's all about the culture, right? It's all about the ethos you get when you get there. So for me, co-working spaces, I think there's a lot of thought around this that needs to be done. For me, it's a little bit like we should move beyond just co-working. For me, co-working as a term alone suggests this very transactional approach of here's your desk, we'll leave you to it, here's a locker. I think what's really exciting about the new wave of co-working, and I'm talking about like Second Home, the Trampery, and all of their kind of expansions and partnerships, like the new Publicis one at Old Street, is the Publicis one. They've got agencies, creative agencies, working from there full time. With Second Home, you've got this very particularly curated selection of companies that Rowan and his team have put together. I think what's exciting about that is there are all of these dizzying options. You just need to really work out what's most important to you. For some companies where they're still growing, it's flexibility of space. For others, it's cost. For others, it's the program of events. I think Tech Hub are particularly, they have a fantastic program of events like Startup Funeral, where founders get up and talk about how much they failed and why they failed.
Startup Funeral.
Startup Funeral.
Is this like
cool.
a pre-mortem? Is that what that is, that concept?
It's a total post-mortem, but it's kind of led by a guy wearing a dog collar, holding a copy of the Lean Startup.
Okay.
It's really fun.
Okay, and it's failure stories.
It's failure stories.
Real failure stories.
Founder failure stories.
Okay.
Sean Zavinis from Tab, who wrote a fantastic Medium post about why they failed and how much they failed, and it was pretty spectacular. Standing up and talking about, sharing this message that failure is something to learn from. And that's been another massive cultural shift, I think, in the UK, is, for me, having changed my career 2 or 3 times, there was a lot of anxiety from people that didn't, my parents, for example, friends who perhaps have had more linear career paths. Nearly every founder that I know right now who is post sort of 30 or so that's really exciting has done the same shift. I know you have too. It's about flexibility. It's about pursuing what you really feel passionate about.
Right, but it's kind of hard to educate that, especially to the British public. The concept of failure.
We're still learning.
You're still learning. It's strange because we talk about the British culture and the American culture, and obviously in tech, everyone does look west, right? They do look to the valley, and that's
changing,
kind of,
I think.
it is changing, but that's like, in a weird way, that's in the back of your mind kind of the right way to do it. But then there's so many wonderful things about British culture, and we're doing things different over here, and perhaps this is the right way to do it. How do those two conflict? I know you're heading back to San Francisco in a couple weeks to go back to, you Google and speak with your people, so you have weird umbilical ties over there.
Yeah.
How do you deal with this constant valley versus
Well, so I guess I've always reported to San Francisco in my time at Google. I love San Francisco. It's an amazing city and an amazing culture. But I kind of struggle with the way that we're always comparing and contrasting. For me, every city is different. And what I find exciting is local ecosystems with kind of global ambition and global ties. So I think with the Valley particularly, there are so many factors that we haven't even worked out yet as to why it's been so incredibly successful. It's extremely weird if you look at it. You've got this tiny area where they've had such a lot of success. And I look at what's happening right now in like Berlin, Stockholm, London, all around the world, and it's really exciting, but it's different and markedly so. The verticals that we're pursuing are different, the models are different, the culture is different. I think that's a good thing. I think particularly we shouldn't be trying to replicate. We should be focusing on what makes our kind of local system really great. And I do kind of challenge that point that we're always looking west. I don't think we're necessarily seeing that anymore. I think companies increasingly, and I'm thinking of companies at campus who are particularly working in e-commerce, they're looking to Spain, they're looking to Poland. Some of them are looking to China and Russia, which to me is really interesting because I have so little knowledge of those markets and I really would like to learn more. Increasingly what we're seeing is our minds are open. I think the culture of the Valley, that kind of the confidence, the vision, I think we really want to extract that. For me, the vision, the kind of 10x thinking, the moonshot thinking is totally aspirational. We should always be trying to replicate that. But I think we're coming at it from a slightly more humble perspective, perhaps. And I think also you look at our community at campus, it's getting more diverse every single year. The 29% women this year versus 20% last year. But then you look at YC, the latest cohort, they took Y Combinator, of course, the latest cohort they had over there in America, in San Francisco, in the Valley, the age range is 20 to 65. I think we're seeing that over here too.
Right,
Is
culturally diverse as well. Mexican
very-
population, black population. It was
very
all these
culturally diverse.
big numbers, right? Yeah,
And
yeah.
I still worry about the valley being, and I think it's changing as well over there. I don't know the valley, so I really can't talk about this, but I still think there's a perception that the valley is kind of very male dominated, very white dominated. You look at campus, with 90 nationalities, 29% female, very age diverse, I think. I think London, being so multicultural has that to offer, And I think there's something about, if you've moved countries, there's a certain boldness there that makes you an amazing entrepreneur.
Yeah, I call it the immigrant mind.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's something that I've talked about before. But that whole concept when you move somewhere,
Yeah.
and then where you're willing to do anything, you don't have a safety net, and you're just kind of
But Isn't that a bit like going to university? It's like you're breaking away from what you know. You're on your own for the first time in your life a lot of the time. You're going into the unknown. It's exciting, but it's terrifying. It's uncomfortably exciting in that way.
Right. Top tip for raising money. What is the one thing you can tell people to look out for, to not look out for? I'm sure you've seen people do it the right way, the wrong way. Not to put you on the spot for one thing, but in the conscious of time, what is the one thing?
Work out what kind of funding you want. I think people obsess about getting VC funding, but unless you have a company that's super high growth, really scalable, and will appeal to a very particular kind of VC, look at your other options.